Good afternoon, guys, and welcome back to U.S. History 10. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We were right in the midst of the 1850s, and we were talking extensively about the conflicts that were leading us into the Civil War. So before we jump back into where we left off last week, let's talk a little bit about where we left off with the political parties and talk about these political parties for just a moment to understand how divided the United States was at this point over the issue of slavery. And if we look at our chart over here, we can see extensively that when we look down, especially when we're looking at the major platforms, every one of these parties are divided on how they feel about slavery. Every one of them have different feelings. One of the biggest parties that we're going to focus on is going to be the Republican Party here. We're going to focus on, of course, their opposition to the expansion of slavery. And this is going to be the major party as we roll into the election of 1860 that's going to come out the big winner. But all of these political parties at this point are fighting against each other, trying to figure out, is slavery going to stay? Are we going to get rid of slavery in the United States? And this is really what has us divided at this point. Now, as we get closer to the late 1850s, we're getting to the point where, of course, we're right on the verge of war. War is on the horizon in the United States. And one of the biggest court cases during this time period that's really going to divide the United States and intensify this debate is going to be the Dred Scott case. And Dred Scott was a slave. He had actually worked for a doctor, had moved from slave territory into free territory, and tried to sue for his freedom, claiming that when he went into that free territory, he was then there free. Well, unfortunately, when this court case finally made it to the Supreme Court, the leading Chief Justice at that time, Roger Taney, from the South, he was a Southerner, he decided, unfortunately, that we actually ruled that slaves have no rights as citizens, and also that Congress cannot forbid slavery in the territories. Here, all this does is just intensify the situation, because now we see that slaves, they have no rights as citizens. They are no longer deemed U.S. citizens. So essentially, they cannot actually sue for their freedom in court. They have no right to actually sue in court. But another big thing that this does is that Congress not being able to forbid slavery in the territories, all that's going to do is allow for the expansion of territory as we enter into the late 1850s and, of course, the early 1860s. So that's the big fear coming from the North, that slavery is only going to expand and those slave states are going to gain even more power in Congress. Now, at the same time, at the end of the 1850s, one of the most famous presidents in American history is starting to really make a name for himself in his party, which of course is the Republican Party. The Republican Party is founded in the mid-1850s, and the biggest major point of their platform is, of course, trying to stop the expansion of slavery into these territories. Now, Lincoln, unfortunately, just a brief background about his political history. He's a lawyer. He had been a member of the state legislature in Illinois. He had also been a part of Congress. But he tries to run for a Senate seat against our buddy Stephen Douglas that we talked about last week. And he actually loses that Senate seat. And that might seem a little weird. Why are we praising this loss? Well, it does get him to the forefront of the Republican Party. The party starts to seem a little bit more interested in his platform, his beliefs and his ideas. And he starts to become a rising star in the party. And that's very big as we roll into the election of 1860. So as we get to 1860, of course, every 4 years we elect a new president, and it's time to elect another president. At this point, Abraham Lincoln is running for the Republican position, running for the Republican spot in this election. Now, the crazy thing about the election of 1860 is this is actually an election where you've got a lot of different people vying for the presidency. You've got 4 different individuals at this point, of course, trying to become the next president of the United States. And of course, they're running from different platforms, they're running from different parties, but Lincoln is going to come out the victor here. And the reason for that is he gains the majority of the votes in the North. When we think about population, which we talked about last week, during the 1840s and the 1850s, the population in the North is growing tremendously. Influx of immigrants, growth of industry. So you have a lot more people in the North at this point than you do in the South. So he's going to gain a lot of votes in the North, and that's why, despite the fact that he gets less than half of the popular vote, he still is going to win the election of 1860. That's where the big troubles begin, guys. That's where we start to see a lot of problems, because once we see Lincoln elected in 1860, Southern states, they start getting a little antsy. We start to see that worry that if Lincoln comes into the presidency, is he going to get rid of slavery? As it says here, Southern states are worried that Lincoln will interfere with slavery in the South. He says initially when he's running for the presidency that he's not going to get rid of slavery in the South, but a lot of Southern states don't trust that. They see him as a Republican, which he is, which is a part of this party that's very much pushing for abolition of slavery. So they're very fearful of what Lincoln's next move is going to be. In December of 1860, just a month after Lincoln is elected the next president of the United States, South Carolina secedes from the Union. And by the spring of 1861, the Confederate States of America is going to be formed. So very quickly, things are going to escalate after Lincoln's election. And within just a couple of months after, of course, his election, he's inaugurated into office, the Civil War is going to start in April of 1861. All right, so very quickly, before we actually move into our Civil War content, let's look at this document right here, because this is a very telling document. When we look at this, of course, we all look at primary resources in our history classrooms, but this is a very interesting primary resource because it was written almost, 10 years before the Civil War breaks out. I didn't put the guy's name on there. We're going to see if you can guess who this gentleman is that wrote this. But this is what he said. He was actually a member of the House of Representatives. He said, "And such a war it would be, following the dissolution of the Union. Sir, we may search the pages of history, and none so ferocious, so bloody, so implacable, so exterminating, would rage with such violence. I implore, gentlemen, I adjure them, whether from the South or the North, to pause at the edge of the precipice before the fearful and dangerous leap to be taken into the yawning abyss below." The guy that actually said this was Henry Clay. And if you remember back to our discussion from last week, Henry Clay, we called him the great compromiser. He's trying to make the big push, of course, to figure out the issue of slavery. He tried to figure it out with, of course, with his Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850. We see, of course, that doesn't work out. And we see, of course, the Union dissolving by the time that we get to 1860. But it's kind of crazy to think about this document was written 10 years prior to the Civil War, really 11 years before the Civil War broke out. And of course, it's just a telling, almost kind of like a fortune teller situation. I'm looking for the correct word there. That's telling us this is what's going to happen if we don't wrangle in this issue over slavery. And unfortunately, that's what we see happen in 1860, is basically the Union dissolving over this one major issue. All right, so we're going to move forward now, guys, and we're actually going to start, if we're looking at content, and if you are following along at home, you're doing your packets, or you're using your readings from your history textbook, where we're moving in today, guys, is actually chapter 11. So we're starting the Civil War. And the majority of this content, if you're going through, doing your readings, doing your packets, you're going to see that the majority of this today that we're going to talk about from the Civil War is actually coming from section 1 of your readings. Next week, we're going to move into the second half of the Civil War. We're going to move into 1863. We'll talk about things, big parts of the Civil War, such as the Emancipation Proclamation, Gettysburg. We'll talk about the Gettysburg Address. That's the other address we're going to talk about. And of course, these major battles towards the end of the war that, of course, is going to lead to the Union win in 1865. But this is the major objective that we're going to cover for the next 20 minutes or so. And this is going to bleed into next week as well. So we'll see, of course, this play out as well there. So the objective that we're covering for today is describe how the Civil War influenced the United States, including the Anaconda Plan, which we'll talk about today, and the major battles, including the Battle of Bull Run, Antietam's, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and Sherman's March to the Sea. So a couple of these we're going to talk about today, but the big thing that we're going to see here is the start of the war today, and of course, how the war starts to ramp up in 1861 and into 1862. All right, so let's talk about the start of this war. How does the war actually start? Who fires the first shots of the Civil War? Well, it's not the Union. The Union doesn't take control of the situation. The Confederacy actually comes in and takes control and starts the ball rolling towards an actual full-blown war that we're going to have by the summer of 1861. So by the time that we get to early 1861, as the Confederacy is emerging, the Confederacy has elected a president. We have Jefferson Davis as their president. He was a former senator from the state of Mississippi. We have, of course, his cabinet set up. Pretty much this whole government has been set up in the South to, of course, facilitate the governing of the Confederate States of America. And one of the big things that they do as they start to begin this process of taking over the governments within the states in the Confederacy, one of the big things they want to do is take over the military establishments that are in the South that, of course, are now Union military establishments that are, of course, part of the United States of America and not part of the Confederate States of America. And one of the forts that they want to try to take is a fort called Fort Sumter in South Carolina. That is actually in Charleston Harbor, and it blocked the port of Charleston. Of course, that fort is there for protection for Charleston to make sure, of course, that the city is protected if someone tries to attack their city. And the Confederates are to go in and take Fort Sumter. Well, they demand, of course, the Union to surrender this. And Lincoln's got a bit of a dilemma here. What is he going to do? Is he going to reinforce the fort? If he reinforces the fort, that looks like he's ready for a fight. And Lincoln's not necessarily wanting to start a war with the Confederate States of America at this point. At the beginning of the war, his main goal is to try to keep the Union together. He doesn't want to fracture it any more than it already has at this point. So if we reinforce the fort, that looks like, well, we're ready, of course, to have a full-blown war. Or does the Union evacuate the fort? Well, what does it look like if the Union evacuates the fort? It kind of looks like the Union's just given up. Let's allow the South to have this fort. And basically what you do if you evacuate the fort, you're legitimizing the southern states. You're basically saying that the Confederacy is a legitimate government, that of course this means that what they're doing is correct. And that's not what Lincoln wanted. He wanted to hold the Union together, and that was his big worry. So what decision does Lincoln actually make? He sends food. That's what he does. He wants to make sure that the soldiers in the fort are taken care of. He doesn't want to be the first to, take action. Because if he does that, the North is going to look like the aggressor, not the South. So this dilemma is going to play out. Of course, we talked about Jefferson Davis here just a moment ago, the presidents of the Confederacy. That's a picture of him there. So what's going to play out at Fort Sumter is April 12th, 1861, just had that anniversary a couple of days ago. President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy is going to order attack on Fort Sumter. Let's take this fort. We've taken other military establishments in the South. Let's take this fort. And once this happens, of course, it's not a massive battle. The Confederates are going to bombard Fort Sumter. The Union is going to surrender the fort, and the Confederates take over the fort. Not a massive battle, but it does, of course, begin the aggression between the North and the South at this point in time. Now, very quickly, of course, after the attack on Fort Sumter, Virginia is going to secede. Why is this so important? Well, Virginia is the largest state in the Union at this point, still at this time. We've talked about Virginia from the very beginning of this course since 1607, and it's always been, at this point, one of the largest states, most populated, richest. And if Virginia pulls away from the Union, that's a bit of a hit for the Union. If they join the Confederate States, that's a big help for the Confederate States. There's money there, there's people there. Those are simply resources that can be added to either side. So this is kind of a hit it is a big hit for the North, of course, when Virginia secedes. But after Virginia secedes from the Union, this is where we're going to start to see the North ramp up their efforts. Lincoln sees there's going to be a fight. We're going to have to play this out. We're going to have to figure out how to pull the Union together. And if it means defeating the Confederate States to bring us back together, we're going to have to fight. Now, what the Union does, what Lincoln orders, well, not quite. He orders a little bit later on the adding of more soldiers. But even before Lincoln says, hey, we need soldiers to fight this war, you have people rushing in the North to enlist. Because again, over this issue with slavery, there's a lot of people that join the fight for that reason, and there's a lot of people that join the fight simply because they want to preserve the Union at this point. And the reason that Virginia doesn't want to secede, they don't want to fight the South. They're a southern state. They, of course, don't want to fight against their brothers. Now, we will see in Virginia, the western portion of Virginia, that actually is going to break away from the state of Virginia at this point. They're going to secede from Virginia and create a new state. And in 1861, a large portion of Western Virginia is going to become the state of West Virginia because it was mainly non-slave-holding individuals. If you know anything about West Virginia, their big economy there, of course, is coal, and that's where the majority of the work is coming from. There wasn't a whole lot of need for slavery in the Virginia, so that's why we're going to see that big breakaway. Now, 3 states that are actually slave states will actually stay in the Union at this point. These are states that we call border states. Let's go to our next slide and we'll look and see. This is a nice map laying out, of course, what the Union and the Confederacy looked like in 1861 as the war breaks out. And you can see that there's 3 states in green here, Missouri, Kentucky, and West Virginia. These states decide not to break away from the Union. They decide to stay, even though they're slave states, they're going to stay loyal to the Union. But what's crazy about these 3 states is that you're going to have family members, brothers, fathers, uncles, cousins fighting against each other because you have some people that have joined the Union side, some people that have joined the Confederate side. So it's a little bit of a crazy situation there, brothers basically fighting brothers. But you can see by the time that we get to 1861, we've got 11 states in the Confederacy at this point. And the majority of the territory, of course, west of the Mississippi, or really west of Texas, the majority of that is still territory. You will have some fighting, maybe especially in California, a little bit of fighting there, but the majority of this fighting is going to stay in the territories here on the map. All right, so as the war actually breaks out, you know, when war starts, there's always a big question of how long is this war going to last? You know, when you are fighting a war, you're going to be depleted of resources, you're going to be depleted of manpower, and eventually those resources are going to run out. So anyone from the top tiers of government all the way down to the bottom of basic individuals in society, they're going to wonder, how long is this war going to last, because everyone's being affected by it. And at first, the big question is, can we make this a short war? Can the Union defeat the Confederacy, put the Union back together? That's Lincoln's plan, of course, without depleting all the resources that you have. But as we look at this and we talk about, of course, these strategies in war and the advantages that one side's going to have, can one side defeat the other? We have to look at, of course, what do they have? What does each side have to offer? And if you look at the Union, of course, they've got multiple different advantages. They've got soldiers, they've got factories, they've got food, and they've got railroads. Why are all these factors important? With the soldiers, they've got a massive population in the North. And we're going to see on a chart here in just a moment how large the population is in the North and just how many more soldiers the North has to offer compared to the South. Another big advantage the Union has is factories. Of course, factories are big because they can create war products. They have food production, of course, in the middle, what we consider the mid-Atlantic states. We've got a lot of food production still in Pennsylvania, New York, and these areas. So food is abundant, of course, to feed the troops. And another thing is railroads. Having a system of railroads set up, you can move troops and supplies very easily. But another thing about the railroads, what's so important having so many railroads in the North, is telegraph lines. Telegraph lines are laid along railroad lines, so the North was able to communicate with each other very quickly. Battles would be happening on the field, and Lincoln would have information within seconds of what was going on within that battle, so that's a huge advantage for the North there. Now for the Confederacy, what advantages do they have? Compared to the North, not quite as many, but they do have a lot of money. You got to remember, there's not a lot of industry in the South at this point, so unfortunately, you're not going to have a lot of production of war goods in the South. They're going to have to get a lot of their goods from overseas, but that's going to be a bit of a problem when their ports are blockaded. Now, another thing the Confederates do have is generals. They've got a great, not a massive fighting force, but they have great leaders. That's one of the things as we see and progress through the war, you're going to see a lot of really great generals come out of the South. No matter what side you're on, you have to look at battle strategy, what they did. A lot of brilliant minds. Of course, they just weren't on the winning side of the war. But another thing that the Confederates have when it comes to advantages is motivation. They're motivated to fight. They want to keep their way of life. That's what's going to keep the fighting going for over 4 years. Now, one of the big things that we have to talk about when we talk about battle strategies. Now, as a historian, I love war. I like talking. I don't love war. Nobody should love war. But I like talking about war. War is always a very interesting thing to talk about, but battle strategy, not always the most fun to talk about. But the Anaconda Plan is very easy to talk about because this is essentially the plan, the Union strategy to conquer the South. How are we going to bring down the South? And the guy that comes up with this plan is a guy named Winfield Scott. When you were studying the Mexican-American War, Winfield Scott was a major player there, one of the leading generals for the Union Army at this point in time, and he's going to become one of the biggest players when it comes to figuring out how the North is going to defeat the South. So let's look real quick at the points. We're going to look at a map real quick. We're going to wrap this up in a few minutes and look and see how the Anaconda Plan, how important this is going to be as we enter into our major battles next week. So the major parts of the Anaconda Plan that we need to look at, guys, is one, blockading southern ports. If you block the ports, goods, supplies, people can't get in and out. Next, divide the Confederacy in the West. If you can divide the Confederacy in two, you can break it up, you can split up the supplies, and it's going to make it a lot harder for the Confederacy to come together and fight. Another thing, too, is capture Richmond. At this point, Richmond is the capital of the Confederacy. And the big thing here is if you can take the capital, if you can crush the government, you can, of course, bring down this fight, you can bring down this cause. As you progress into world history and later into U.S. history, you talk about Hitler, you'll see him. That was his battle strategy. Let's go hit capitals. Let's take down Paris. And that's going to be successful for him. That's a major, of course, point of war for a very, very, very long time. So if you can take the Confederate capital, that's going to lead to the end and the crushing of that government. Now, when we talk about the Confederate strategy, the Anaconda Plan is the Union strategy, and the Confederates, the only thing that they have is defense. They're basically playing defense. They're going to be constantly trying to defend their land, defend their territory, and if they can invade the North, at some point, that's what they're going to do, but that doesn't happen very often, as we're going to see as we enter in to, of course, the next week, and we talk more and more about these battles. All right, so just very quickly, we're going to wrap up here in we got about 3 minutes left, guys, but I wanted you to take a look as we start entering into these battles next week. Let's take a look at, again, some of these advantages that each side has. And just by looking at this map, this chart, we can see northern and southern resources in 1861. You can very clearly see who has the clear advantage here. We look at military strength, the naval ship tonnage, that's controlled by the North, the iron production, firearms production, everything you need to fight a war, the North has it. And when you look at population, of course, total population eligibility for military, or those eligible for the military, and industrial workers, you can see exponentially that the North has a massive advantage. They have twice the population in the North to the South. This is going to play a big role as we enter deeper into the war and we start to see, of course, production of war goods become more important as we grow deeper into this conflict, and the need, of course, for soldiers. Having that large population is going to play a huge role as we enter into these major battles. All right, so very quickly to wrap us up for today, guys, what I want to do is take a look at one last primary resource for today. This map is actually, it was created in 1861, excuse me. And this is actually an artist's rendering of Winfield Scott Anaconda Plan, the Great Snake, okay? And if you think about an anaconda, what does it do? It's going to strangle, of course, and try to squeeze its enemy or its prey to death. And that's essentially what the North is going to try to do as we enter in hardcore into the Civil War. If we're going to win this war, if the Union's going to win, they've got to have a plan. And let's look at very quickly in the map. I've got some arrows that are going to pop up that are numbered. Let's look at these number 1 arrows here. This is one of the first parts of the plan. This is the blockading of southern ports. If you blockade the ports, guys, nothing can get in. Like I said, nothing can get in, supplies, nothing can get out, of course, men. Next, very quickly, number 2, cutting the South in two. Eventually, this is going to happen along the Mississippi River, but if we can cut the South in two, we can, of course, eliminate their resources. We can block soldiers from coming in to reinforce the cause. That's going to lead to devastation of the Confederacy. And then lastly, number 3, taking the Confederate capital. If the Union can take Richmond, they can bring down the government, they can eventually break down the military, and hopefully end this cause. So guys, we're not going to have time to enter into the battles today, but next week, what we're going to do, we're going to start looking into the major battles of the war. We're going to look at Bull Run, Antietam. We're going to look at some of the Revolution and Warfare next week and start moving a little bit more to battles and to the political side of this war. I hope you enjoyed the lesson today, guys. You guys have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.